Pyridoxamine has been classified by the FDA in such a way as to prevent it being sold as a supplement. And this raises a number of other issues, too.
It's been on the market since I've been alive.
That's correct. Well,
so isn't it considered out there and unpatentable? I mean, it's been out there for at least 50 years.
Well, I like your argument. Unfortunately, the FDA listened to someone else's argument, another pharmaceutical company, quite frankly, that argued to the FDA that pyridoxamine is an investigative new drug, and therefore it was not a supplement.
Can't they do that with everything? Can't they do that with green tea? Can't they do that with the hormones? Can't they do that with every single vitamin, and this just keep going?
Well, I think it's important to understand one thing that we're passionate about as an organization is preserving people's access to nutritional supplements. To your point, we are always active and we are aware of legislation which really threatens people's right to access, not only of nutritional supplements, but we're also active in looking at access to, for example, experimental drugs that may have life-saving benefits that are just being mired in bureaucracy. We believe, and although there is compassionate use programs in existence, but we believe that people who have very serious illnesses or terminal illnesses, for example, really should have access under a physician's guidance and care with close follow-up to experimental treatments that may actually work. It would be such a tragedy, and this occurs, we know this occurs, where experimental drugs are still in the drug delivery process but are not available for use yet because they're still mired in that process. And there are people that have serious illness that are not allowed access to those medications. And we believe that's wrong.
I believe it's wrong, too. In fact, I go a little bit further with you in my paradigm, which is that anybody should be able to, when their health is at risk, experiment with anything they want to. If they are being told they're terminal or they do not want to have a certain type of care that is consistently not worked, it should be their free-for-all to do what they are called to do to save their own life. And the tragedy is that's not allowed here.
No, it is a tragedy, and we believe passionately in freedom of information and health freedoms. And I define health freedoms, to your point, which is to be able to have access, again, under appropriate guidelines, under a physician's care with careful monitoring. But people who have life-threatening illnesses should be able to have access to potentially life-saving strategies, whatever they may be. We think that's very important. So again, and our members and our customers know that we're really passionate about preserving access, not only to nutritional supplements, but in other areas as well. And that's a very good one that we've discussed, which is if someone has a life-threatening illness, we think people have the right to access. Some people may disagree with that.
But it doesn't matter because they're not the ones who are going into the grave. The whole paradigm of medicine and the medical institutions of the world have to shift because at the end of the day, people are going to eventually take their lives in their own hands, and they're going to listen to their own inner voice and do what's in their best interest to do to stay alive. And so what will happen is if a critical mass of people keep dying because we keep using the same methods on a medical level that aren't working, that serve just the pharmaceutical interest, and use what works. And they're going to be willing to experiment. So it's going to happen. The question is how. We have Codex Alimentarius, which I'm sure you're familiar with, that is a international law and statute that is brewing out of Europe to try to make a standardization of everything that is involving supplements and herbs, and very dangerous to health freedoms. I'm doing a completely separate show on that. But, for example, you had something that you were selling called avocado extract, which had fantastic results working with obese people. People wanted to lose fat. Do you remember that?
That was before my time, but there was a product, the sugar, it's actually a type of sugar called manoheptulose, which is presumed to be the active ingredient in avocado, this avocado extract. And there is some interesting data going back to the 1960s, particularly in patients who had hypoglycemia, and that is that the manoheptulose extract seemed to blunt insulin secretion, which, again, if you have hypoglycemia, you certainly don't want your blood sugar to drop even further, which is what insulin does. Just segueing off some of the comments you made earlier about Codex, one of the things that I think it's important for people to understand, and it's amazing to me because I see physicians and presumably people that should know better or be better educated, and they say, and I'm going to paraphrase, they'll say, well, dietary supplements aren't regulated by the FDA. They're unregulated, there's no measure of quality, and I listen to this, and it is completely inaccurate. And I want you listeners to know, dietary supplements are regulated by the FDA. They're just not regulated in the same way as drugs. And this gets to the issue of Codex, which is in Europe, for example, if you go above a certain threshold dosage amount of vitamin C, you can only get that by going to a physician.
I didn't know that.
That's absolutely
Are you
true.
kidding me?
No, it's absolutely true. And I believe, if I remember correctly, I think it's 500 milligrams is the threshold. So
oh my
if you
God!
want above 500 milligrams, you need to go to your physician, who then prescribe that. So what we want to see preserved is people's access to nutritional supplements. We're very active in that area. We believe passionately that that's a right. And I will tell you my personal feeling, which is I think that it would be very unlikely in this country. I do think people would rise up and be very upset. It's one thing to take away a freedom. It's another thing to give a freedom when none existed in the first place. And if for whatever reason there was the real possibility of legislation being enacted to really rob people of freedom of access to nutritional supplements, I think that I know that we would see just this huge swell of anger, and appropriately so. Again, that example, people would be, freedom would be taken away that they already have. And I just don't see that happening. But then again, I think we always need to be vigilant and keep on top of the legislation as it exists.
In 2009, you had in your magazine, you have a wonderful magazine that you release every month to members. You had something that says the generic drug ripoff with Eric Braverman, actually's picture on it. It was the August 2009 version. What is going on with generic drugs? What is the problem?
Well, in a nutshell, it's this, and that is that generic medications, pharmaceuticals, typically are manufactured, and the cost of manufacturing is relatively low, and yet they are sold for a dramatic price increase relative to the cost of manufacturing. Now, we know that branded pharmaceuticals command a premium, and there are a number of reasons for that. One very important reason is that it takes a great deal of money to bring a drug to market. Estimates range anywhere.
20 years?
Well, it's time, but then also anywhere from $800 million to up to $1 billion to bring what we call a new chemical entity, a molecule, up through approval, through an NDA approval, which is a new drug application approval. So it's very, very expensive. So it does. It's in the interest of a pharmaceutical company, if they're going to expend that kind of resources, that branded product is priced appropriately. But once that branded product goes off patent, other manufacturers of pharmaceuticals have an opportunity to manufacture a generic. But what's pretty startling, a lot of people don't realize, is that although the generics are much less expensive than the branded product, there's still a steep price increase.
Definitely.
And it raises really fundamental questions, which we talk about, fairness and honesty, and looking at the fact that if there are other areas that